Well, viewers, those are the headlines, and our top focus: what's taking place in the Middle East. We're learning that Hamas and Islamic Jihad militants have recovered a body in Gaza's Beit Lahia, which is supposed to be handed over to Israel. Hamas has stated that it is going to hand over hostage's body after Israeli forensic services concluded that remains returned a day earlier were not from one of the two final deceased hostages. The handover of the last two hostages' bodies in Gaza would complete a key condition of the initial part of US President Donald Trump's plan to end the war. The group found the body after it had conducted a search in northern Gaza along with a team from the Red Cross as well. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Jordan Cope, Middle East Affairs expert, joining us from Dallas. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. There are two bodies that are still slated to be returned by Hamas to Israel. A lot of analysts have pointed out that that Hamas is trying to delay this entire process so as to ensure that the second phase, which calls for its disarmament, is not implemented. Do you concur with these views?
I don't think the delay is simply about that, but rather Hamas throughout this war has suffered significant blows. And in recent days, there have been videos posted online by militias taking advantage of Hamas's weakness and actually recording some of their members surrendering to their militia. Hamas is at a weak point, and what Hamas ultimately wants right now is to project strength. And by ultimately trying to convey that it has the upper hand in terms of enforcement of the ceasefire provisions, it maintains and helps preserve its legitimacy as the guardian over the Gaza Strip, however perverse its leadership might be. And so also important, I think, to consider at this time is that Hamas has no plans of disarming, and the implementation of the ceasefire ultimately might come apart, ultimately resulting in war in the near future. So it remains yet to be seen how the war, which is currently smoldering, will resume in the near future. But as we can see, there have been consistent violations of the ceasefire in place, namely Hamas's refusal to disarm within a reasonable time, and on top of that, to return the deceased hostages in a reasonable time and manner. And one would not be surprised, again, if Hamas ultimately returned the remains of bodies that were not the two deceased hostages remaining in the Gaza Strip. It's part of the power play, the psychological torture that Hamas inflicts on the Israeli people, and also part of its strategy to get away with as much as it can and to convey that it still retains power and control over the Gaza Strip.
All right, so requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking some further updates from the Middle East. We're now learning that Egypt's State Information Service has denied that the country is coordinating with Israel to reopen the Rafah crossing for Gazans in the coming days. Now, as per reports, Israel has stated that it would open the Rafah crossing from Gaza to Egypt to allow residents to exit the Palestinian enclave in the coming days. Reports suggest that they had originally been preparing for the crossing's opening for pedestrians on the 14th of October after a similar announcement before the opening was delayed. Reopening the Rafah crossing is a part of US President Donald Trump's peace plan for the Palestinian territory, as well as something that UN agencies and other humanitarian actors have long called for. The Rafah crossing is a crucial entry point for humanitarian workers and for lorries transporting aid, food and fuel, which is essential for daily life in a territory which has been deprived of electricity. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Jordan Cope. So I wanted to understand from you, how do you interpret Egypt's stance as far as reopening the Rafah crossing is concerned? Israel has stated that it's just a matter of days now, and Egypt has come out and denied these reports.
A quick misconception: the Gaza Strip does have access to electricity. It might not be at previous levels, but it still does. Now, going back to your point regarding Egypt, Egypt is obviously very concerned about radical elements of Palestinian society being able to enter from the Gaza Strip into Egypt, perhaps those influenced by Hamas or Hamas ideology. The general rule for Egypt in terms of the Rafah crossing throughout this war is that migration towards Egypt is not allowed. It's the exception to the rule. And so Egypt might be publicly stating that it supports a two-way entry and exit system from the Rafah crossing, supposedly in support of Trump's ceasefire deal. One ultimately has to question, given Egypt's role as a mediator, why it took so long for the ceasefire deal to come about, and whether Egypt is actually genuine about the conditions that will potentially burden itself, given Egypt's strong stance against Palestinian migration towards Egypt in any way, shape, or form, even if it's actually not for people moving to live there. One must not forget that other Arab states in the Middle East have previously had issues in terms of Palestinian radicalism within their sovereign territories, such as Jordan. One must not forget Black September in the 1970s, when Palestinian radicals tried to ultimately seize the country, and as well as plotting terrorist attacks from its soil. And Jordan as well during this war has been very hesitant to accept Palestinians towards its soil as well.
All right, sir. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking out time, of course, sharing